All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Maggie Davis. I'm the Deputy Chair of the Arlington Democrats, and we're really glad to be hosting the West Area Legislative Review Session on Zoom in order to account for the social distancing that we are asking everyone to do with the COVID-19 outbreak. So I'm just here to help with the tech, but I'm going to turn this over to our great panel, introduced by our moderator, Mark Habeeb. Mark, it's you.
Thank you, Maggie, and welcome everyone. I'd like to start by thanking Mary Detweiler, who worked very hard with Maggie Davis and Jill at ACDC to move this to the format that we're on, to move this to Zoom. This is a wonderful tool, and obviously we all look forward to the day when we can all be in the same room again and shaking hands and talking together in person. But in the meanwhile, this is a wonderful tool, and I'm really happy to be able to have the flexibility here today to use this. So we're, as Maggie said, this is a review of the legislative session down in Richmond, and we have three members of Arlington's wonderful delegation. Barbara Favola, Senator Barbara Favola of the 31st Senate District. Everybody knows, we all know each other. We all know these people, so I'm not going to waste a lot of time going into great detail. I'll just highlight a couple of things. And all three of them, by the way, had some great successes and introduced some wonderful legislation this year that we will talk about as we proceed. But I'll just highlight a couple of things. We all know Barbara because she was on the Arlington County Board. She represents a large chunk of Arlington and parts of Fairfax and Loudoun. Always fought for issues like children, families, environment. And Barbara chairs the Senate Women's Health Caucus. So, and then we'll talk about some of the specific legislation that she that she fought for and pushed for this year. Patrick Hope is the House of Delegates member of the 47th District. So that will be a lot of you in the West area who are watching. We elected to a sixth term in 2019. Wow, six terms already, Patrick. That's great. And it's been wonderful. It's been wonderful having you down there in Richmond. And I'll just point out to people who may not know, but it's relevant given the time we're in right now, that Patrick's legal practice specializes in healthcare issues, and Patrick is a part-time professor at the Johns Hopkins School of Public Health. So we look forward to hearing from you about the current news of the day. And then finally, Rip Sullivan, who is my delegate in Richmond. Well, he's not just mine, but he does represent. I have my own delegate. That's it. He represents the 48th District. McLean and Arlington, parts of McLean and Arlington are in there. And I guess the main thing I want to highlight about Rip is in 2017, and then again in 2018, he was named chair of the House Democratic Caucus campaign. And I think we all know what happened in 2017 and 2019. We turned Virginia blue. So Rip deserves a lot of credit for that. The way I like to see it is, in 2017, they went to Rip and said, here's an unlimited supply of blue paint, get to work. And he proceeded to paint the House of Delegates blue. So we'll want to talk to you, Rip, about, among other things, about keeping Richmond blue, which is going to be a challenge because they're Barbara, too, there are small margins down there. So
particularly in the Senate, yeah.
Particularly in the Senate, yeah. So it's going to be a tough battle to make sure that all of the things that we won in this session are maintained. I think I'd like to start because we couldn't hold something today and not talk about what's going on around us. And that is, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic, which has affected Virginia. And in fact, I believe if the numbers are still accurate, Arlington has the highest number of cases of any jurisdiction in Virginia, or at least it did as of a couple of days ago. And certainly Northern Virginia is the main focus of where the COVID cases have been in Virginia. So I guess the question that I'd like to throw out here is Virginia doing enough to fight the virus? I know there's been some pressure. There have been some calls on Governor Northam to hold a special session. Is such a session necessary? You're already due back on April 22nd, I think, right, to finalize the legislation. So what should be done in this kind of balance between what local jurisdictions do and what Richmond does, and should there be a special session?
Should we just jump in, or?
Yeah, I think so. There's a small
Okay.
enough number that I think we could probably just jump in.
Okay. I don't believe we need a special session. You know, the governor did declare an emergency, and under the National Emergency Clause of the federal Constitution, so that gives him quite a bit of latitude to rearrange expenditure priorities, to allocate resources, to take steps that would normally require General Assembly approval. So I think in cases like this, at least the textbooks tell us that crises are better managed when there's really a clear chain of authority and there is strong leadership. And I think that very much comes from the executive branch and needs to come from Governor Northam. Whether we're doing enough, I think the governor has taken this very seriously. Certainly he was very quick to close the public schools. He is balancing the economic issues about the complete close down of restaurants against the need for individuals to actually shelter in place. Right now we're under the requirement that no more than 10 individuals can gather in one place. Restaurants are encouraged to still stay open for carry-out orders. And that's probably okay. I mean, that's a good thing. We're seeing social distancing making a difference. Frankly, the biggest issue we're facing, and it's not just an issue in Virginia, is the real lack of protective clothing and protective gear for our healthcare professionals, and then the supply, the actual ventilators and supplies that you need to care for individuals who have the COVID ID condition. So this is just mind-boggling to many of us. Our hearts go out to our frontline providers who are testing us, who are dealing with people who are showing symptoms of the COVID ID, and yet they don't have the supplies and equipment they need. We were told, I guess on a conference call last week, maybe my colleagues were on that call. I know, Rip, I think you were on the call. Patrick, I don't know if you were. We were told that we're going to be incredibly increasing the supply of the protective gear for our healthcare professionals, and that will enable us to test more individuals and to perhaps get a much stronger handle on the virus.
Mark, I don't know if you can hear me.
Yeah.
Perfect. Just a couple things. One, I agree with everything, of course, Barbara said. I had a chance, maybe it was at that call, I can't remember, Barbara, to ask the state epidemiologist specifically about Arlington, because Barbara is right. Arlington has if not the highest, it might be the second highest number of cases at this point. And my sense of this is me talking, is on a per capita basis. It's because we're about at the same as Fairfax, which of course is much bigger than Arlington. So I asked Dr. Peak, the state epidemiologist, whether that indicated Arlington is a cluster, because that has some ramifications for how the epidemiologists approach things, and certainly could have ramifications for what the governor were to do. And she told me that the answer to that was no, despite the large number, because they had not been able to establish any community spread, that those numbers were a result of community spread. In other words, no connections between the people in Arlington that so far have tested positive. And there could be a million reasons for that, including the fact that Arlingtonians are, they travel a lot. and who knows where they got the infection. But
I actually
my point simply is it would seem to suggest that certainly in Arlington's case, and I think this is true statewide, that the sort of social distancing measures that the governor put in place, the president has talked about, and that all of us have been touting in various emails to constituents. I don't want to be paint too rosy a picture. I'm not sure it's working, but it so far has so far at least seems to have stopped a community spread in Arlington, at least as far as the numbers are concerned right now. So God only knows, and I mean that quite literally. God only knows probably where we'll be 3-4 weeks from now. But it seems to me, from my perspective, that our community is pulling together quite well. The governor is leading us quite well. We're all frustrated. If you talk to the governor or listen in on his press conferences, which anyone who's listening, by the way, can do, he's as frustrated as anyone with the stockpiling issue, the lack of masks, the lack of other PPE equipment, the lack of tests, of course. But we're all hopeful that we're on the verge of solving those problems.
Mark, if I could just
Sure.
jump in. Your question was, do we need a special session? And I agree with Senator Favola that I don't think that we need that right now. The Fed seem to be moving really at breakneck speed for them to address the issues with small businesses, which we've heard a lot from in Arlington, and from unemployment insurance, trying to make workers whole, to help them with health care, trying to waive co-pays for testing and also for treatment, if that's what's necessary, but also addressing small businesses and workers. And then apropos to what Senator Favola's really good bill about sick leave, I think that should be something that should be at least discussed at the state level. But so that's the question about whether we should have a special session to do that. The other question is, are we doing enough? And I think that's the thing that people are asking over and over, because you see states around us literally shutting down. Major states, Illinois, California, New York, Pennsylvania, shutting down, really. Virginia hasn't quite done that yet. My biggest concern is that whether we are taking this pandemic seriously enough. And Arlington, I think if you walk around Arlington, if you go to the grocery stores or you do carry out supporting small businesses, which I support and I hope we all do, I think Arlingtonians are taking it very seriously. And my sense is that Northern Virginia is doing a pretty decent job of doing that. But this is really hard on my family and a lot of families. And so yesterday, my wife and I decided to take our kids out to Fredericksburg area to drive around. In fact, we went around to see, my daughter goes to Kenmore Middle School, and we wanted to see the Kenmore that it was named after. And so we drove there just to drive around. We never got out of a car. We practiced safe distancing. But my observation of people driving through Fredericksburg are not taking this seriously. And I don't know if you saw Blue Virginia, Lowell Feld's blog that he puts up. He was showing Amanda Chase had some comments about pleading with her supporters to take this seriously. And the comments on the Facebook page were anything but in taking it seriously. So that's my concern, is that there's a large section of the state that aren't taking this seriously enough. And the question is that the governor's directive, is that enough? Are we taking it seriously enough throughout the whole Commonwealth? Because right now, I think Northern Virginia is doing a fairly good job of trying to contain the spread of this pandemic, this virus. But are we going to see down the road where we're not doing enough and the rest of the state is going to catch up where states like New York are? And I think we just need to be very careful of that.
Do you think that part of this is that longstanding issue in Virginia of the kind of the differences between Northern Virginia and the rest of the state? So if you look at a map of where the outbreaks are in Virginia, it is mostly in Northern Virginia. I mean, that's where, which makes sense. That's where a large part of the population lives. That's where people live closer together. People in urban areas live closer together. So how do you convince somebody, say city officials in Danville, that you need to close your schools? I mean, I think, and I'm by no means have any medical or epidemiology knowledge, but everything you read is it will spread. I mean, it will eventually. So it's really the argument, I guess, is you should be ahead of the curve. But on an immediate basis, you know, it may look like to people elsewhere in the state, well, we're not being affected. The closest case to us is in, you know, Richmond or whatever. Is that part of the issue? Is there pushback from legislators in other parts of the state that don't want them to have a statewide?
I haven't, this is Barbara Favola. I haven't seen pushback from other lawmakers because, I mean, we do have access to a lot of information and we believe it is our responsibility, I hope, for the most part. I would say every lawmaker believes it's his or her responsibility to take a leadership role in this crisis and inform, educate, and help our constituents. Is it, you know, I guess your question is it such that people may be living outside of these areas that have experienced cases, do they take it seriously? I don't see how you cannot understand what's going on with the news feeds, that it's constant, it's 24/7.
Yeah.
You turn on any channel, any, you know, any radio channel, any TV channel, all social media outlets, they're all talking about it. So I believe people trust the governor to make the right decision. And I believe that right now, even in parts that haven't experienced large numbers, that there's this acknowledgement we need to do the right thing because it spreads. I mean, this is an infectious disease and it does spread a lot faster than any normal flu. So that's why the governor was a statewide mandate to close the schools, which I thought was really important because you don't want school systems left to interpret guidelines differently.
Right.
That sends a very confusing message. So it was a statewide mandate to close the schools, and that was good. And this social distancing is going out consistently and constantly on all of the public news feeds that I think individuals would have access to. So it's an interesting point that Patrick brought up. I mean, I haven't ventured out of my Arlington base since I came back from Richmond. So I haven't seen other parts of Virginia. And I was surprised at Patrick's comment.
Mark, let me just I do think it's fair to say, I mean, Patrick made a glancing comment about the comments on Senator Chase's feed. I do think it's fair to say that there are still people, forget about in Virginia, in the country, sort of, let's just say late to the realization. And I don't want to get into a big bash fest this morning. It's not our purpose of what's been happening at the federal level and how we've been a little late to realize things. But the good news is I think all of our leaders seem to be there finally. But it's certainly the case that all of our leaders weren't there for a while, and indeed all of our media wasn't there for a while. So it does, of course, always depend on what you happen to be watching or who you happen to be listening to. And I haven't been to Fredericksburg either, Patrick, but I have been certainly watching things online and such. I do think it is fair to say that there are some people still out there not yet convinced, put it that way, based on who they might have been listening to in the past. And so I think the three of us on this call, and frankly, all Virginians, all Americans, have an obligation to make sure that we're all making crystal clear exactly the scope of this problem so that everyone becomes convinced. And I think that's what the governor's been trying to do with his daily, and in a couple of days he's actually done twice daily news conferences and such. It's something we all as citizens have an obligation to make sure our neighbors, our fellow Virginians, our fellow Americans all understand the scope of the problem we've got.
I think anyone who doubts that needs to just recall that 2 months ago, which was not a long time ago, this was only in China.
Yeah.
And now you've got 4,000 people dead in Italy. I mean, this thing moves, and it moves rapidly.
Well, it was actually only 2.5 weeks ago that we left Richmond. And I don't know about you two, but to me, it seems like 6 months ago that we left Richmond.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I would agree.
And when we left Richmond, it was here, but it was not something that had yet gripped the nation from a media perspective. And in just those 2.5 weeks, obviously things have changed dramatically. Let me say one last thing, and I know you've got other questions you want to move to, Mark. With respect to the special session, I'm with my colleagues here. I don't think we need a special session. We do have upcoming what's called reconvene, or the veto session, and I do think that gives the governor an opportunity to make changes and ask us for any authority he thinks he might need at this point, to particularly the budget, as we look at how this crisis might be affecting the budget we passed just earlier this month. So that's already set. There are some interesting questions about how we're going to conduct the reconvene. Putting 100 members of the House of Delegates and 40 members of the Senate in rooms, which will be contrary to law. But I know there's some smart people thinking about how we're going to be able to accomplish that.
It could be the first Zoom session of the Virginia. That's a long way from Williamsburg, isn't it, to Zoom?
Oh dear.
But actually, you raised an issue that was actually my next question, Rip. And by the way, Mary Detwater solicited questions from volunteers, precinct captains, precinct leaders throughout the West area and other areas. And we had a wonderful slew of questions that would actually keep us here all day. So if you don't hear your exact question, it's probably been rolled into another question. But one of the questions that we did get, and one of the questions I have too, is what are the ramifications for the budget on this? I mean, revenue is likely to be down because tax income is going to be down. Needs are going to be higher. So expenses will have to go up. How do you see this affecting this budget cycle, given that everything's got to balance out in the end?
I think, this is Barbara again, a lot of it's going to depend on how much federal money is actually made available. And that's the big unknown here. The state really is the safety net provider of last resort or first resort, depending on how you view it. And I mean, we've had a 30% increase in unemployment compensation requests in just the last 2 weeks. Small businesses are asking for no interest loans or just flat out grants because they can't stay open. We've had requests for grants to even mid-sized businesses so they can delay layoffs. So all of those things combined sort of require dollars going out the door, and they also limit dollars coming in. So there's a considerable reduction in sales tax. There's a considerable reduction in income tax, at least at the state level. Now, interestingly, the local levels are not hit quite as hard because they rely more heavily on the real estate tax. And unless property values somehow take a big dip, the main source of revenue for our localities will probably be secure and not be too much affected by the crises if it doesn't last too long. So, but I mean, local governments in Arlington, for example, half of their real estate dollars do come in from the business buildings, from commercial buildings. So if everybody's teleworking and commercial buildings are struggling and they're not paying the rent, then there will be a hit at the local level rather considerably. So it's a big unknown right now in terms of what the impact is. But our state treasurer, Aubrey Lane, I thought painted a picture of a great deal of caution and uncertainty. The last time we had our, we're all on this sort of call every other day, actually. And that was this message. I think it was just on Friday.
Yeah, I don't remember whether it was Friday or Thursday. Is anyone else having the problem I'm having? It's hard to tell what day of the week it is. What's
Yeah.
today?
I think it was
Yeah.
Friday because I had it
The
Monday,
norm-
Wednesday, Friday.
The normal rhythms of day the week are been disrupted. I think it's Sunday we're talking today, right? Aren't we? Is it
Yeah,
Sunday?
yeah.
For me, it's
Yeah,
kind of a sunrise and sunset. That's kind of what I'm acknowledging.
Yeah.
Everything else is a blur.
I get it. Yeah, I get it.
Let me just add, I think Barbara's exactly right. So much of this is going to depend on what the feds do. Remember, the feds can print money. Virginia can't. I know the Secretary Lane is looking really hard at this. One of the things when we left Richmond we were proud of, maybe we'll talk about the budget, maybe this will be some of the questions you've got, Mark, but one of the things we're proud of is that we continue to sock away a lot of money for our reserves and our rainy day fund. So certainly your viewers, our viewers today should be confident. Virginia has enough money to run its government right now and its programs. And remember, tax receipts, at least in terms of current receipts, are based on last year's economy, not this year's economy. But that, of course, gives us challenges for what next year's second half of the biennium might look
Right.
Yeah.
like. But so much of it's going to depend on, as Barbara said, how whether it's 1 trillion or 2 trillion or whatever it ends up being pumped into the system, because that ends up becoming money that the state can use to whether it's help localities or whatever. Let me add one other thing, just with respect to the sort of the functioning of government. One of the things that's been worrying localities has been how can they continue to function under FOIA and transparency laws.
Mhm.
How can they literally go about making their decisions? And the Attorney General just 36 hours ago or something responded to a letter I'd sent him now a week or so ago, giving localities, I think, a fair share of relief on their ability to literally have their boards meet and make decisions during this crisis, so that the wheels of government can keep turning. So the governor, the attorney general, everyone's looking for ways to make sure, as nearly as possible, we can continue to function as we normally would, despite the crisis.
Can I just jump in? Rip, Mark Herring issued an opinion. I think I got it Saturday morning.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Allowing for electronic meetings, at least under certain conditions. So I think we're all struggling with how we conduct business now and still meet our very important laws on sunshine and transparency.
Right.
Yeah, and I would just add, Mark, and the only concern that I have is we passed a really good budget, which I hope we can get into some of the specifics about it. But when we've been in these situations before, when we've had to adjust our budget situation, I agree it's going to depend on what the feds put in. But we're all just speculating on what the projections are going to be.
Yeah.
And if the projections are going to be dire, then we will have to make some adjustments to our budget. And in years past, what we've done is we've looked at salary increases for government employees and teachers. We put a lot of new money into K through 12 for school counselors and per pupil costs. A lot of money has been put into mental health and people with disabilities. So you look at those types of categories and you adjust it based on what the projections are likely to be. But there's a lot of good things that we put into this budget. To Delegate Sullivan's point, we have historic levels of reserves that we can tap into. So hopefully that if the adjustments based on what the feds are bringing in, and don't forget, to Senator Favola's point about shifting some costs to the localities, that's something the state has not been shy of doing in instances like this. Hopefully with all those types of streams that we can pull to, you'll see very little adjustment for the current budget. At least I'm hopeful of that, because I think we all hope and pray that this is a temporary blip, that we can get back on once we get through this crisis, that things will start moving towards where we currently are in hopefully short order. But it could take several months. It could take a year or so. But hopefully we've got all those fundamentals in place that we can quickly move back.
Well,
Good
I
answers,
hope,
colleagues.
sorry?
I was just saying,
Barbara?
good answers, colleagues.
Yes, no, excellent answers. I was just going to say, Barbara, too, that I hope the other people watching will agree with me that personally is very reassuring to me. I mean, it wasn't candy coated. You all recognize what the problems are and what the challenges are, but it makes me feel really good to see that at least the three of you are on top of it. And I trust everybody, whatever party, we're talking political party, that people are on top of this. This is about very, very core health and survival issues. So that does make me feel good. So I want to go, I had to start with obviously the question about the virus, because we just couldn't ignore the reality. But I want to go back now. Let's pretend it's a couple of weeks ago, and you just finished the legislative session, a great legislative session. You're not washing your hands for 20 seconds. As I've been telling people, if you wash your hands for 20 seconds every 20 seconds, you'll occupy your whole day. Very, very, very quickly. The day will just fly by.
I need a lot more hand cream, to tell you the truth.
But let's go before that. When you finish the legislative session, what for you personally, and it's probably going to be hard to narrow it down because the three of you were very active in patroning bills and proposing bills and amending bills, but what specific piece of legislation are you most proud of? And what legislation do you think will have the biggest positive impact on people in Arlington?
Can I start? Let me start because it's apropos to the coronavirus. And Senator Favola deserves a Most Valuable Player Award for her shepherding my bill on vaccines and immunizations through the Senate. It
was a good bill.
Under current law, whenever there's a new vaccine that's recommended by the Centers for Disease Control, who we're listening to it quite a bit lately, we have to go to the General Assembly to ask for permission to add that vaccine to our list of recommended or mandated vaccines. In the last, I'd say 12 years, the General Assembly has rejected every single new addition that the Centers for Disease Control has recommended. And that has left out meningitis, hepatitis, rotavirus, and HPV vaccine for males. And I have brought meningitis for 2 years and HPV for males 1 year, and they've never made it out of subcommittee. Well, fast forward to where we are now. Well, at least let me just talk about the bill that we passed. The bill now says that the recommendations from the CDC will be likely to be considered by the Department of Health. And that will be an automatic where we're no longer having to opt in to these new vaccines,
right,
but you could opt out. I suppose you could put in a bill to reject the Centers for Disease Control recommendations. Now, it's apropos to this because we all know, hope, and pray that there will be a vaccine for the coronavirus.
Right.
And when it does get recommended, we don't want to have to be in a position where we have to wait for a General Assembly session to come in before it's mandatory. And it's just automatic. And that's the way it should be. All those 4 vaccines that I mentioned will now be starting July 1st when the governor signs the bill, will be automatic. And this was a great deal of opposition came out from the anti-vaxxers. Yeah. And if for those that are on the phone that experience a lot of pushback from the gun activists, the anti-vaxxers, they have nothing on the gun activists. I mean, the anti-vaxxers, I should say, were much more aggressive in pushing legislators to reject this bill. We made it through the House. Thanks to Senator Favola, we made it out of the Senate, and it's now on the governor's desk. But you talk about something that's going to have an impact on people's lives, save people's lives. My opinion, that bill will probably do the most for not just Arlington, but the entire state ongoing.
And as you said, how timely can you get?
Yeah.
Right.
You know?
Right. It was a struggle, though, getting it out of the Senate. I had to amend it on the floor, had to with my votes.
Yeah.
It should not have been that much of a struggle.
And I do remember, I mean, boy, have times changed. I do remember that Senator Chase stood on the floor of the Senate saying that we should not be taking the federal government, the CDC's recommendations or for anything. And now she puts out Facebook posts saying that we should trust the CDC on what they're recommending here. So obviously things have changed quite a bit. And Senator Favola, you deserve a lot of credit for getting that through the Senate. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you, Patrick. It's good to have a strong team, right?
Mark, let me, so there are two MVPs on this call because Delegate Hope took on a huge responsibility when the speaker called to ask him to chair the Public Safety Committee in the House. I'm sure he instantly understood that that was A, a heavy lift, and B, I don't want to say dangerous, but it's, you know, controversial, destined to be a controversial session for that particular committee. And Patrick did a spectacular job of shepherding through numerous gun safety bills. 7 of the governor's 8 ended up passing, including one of mine, for which I've already thanked Patrick publicly, but I'll do it again, which is the ERPO bill, the red flag bill, which I've been trying to get through for several years now. I believe, simply because I know it's been studied in other states, it's been effective in other states, that it will save lives. It's as much a suicide prevention bill as it is a mass shooting prevention bill. Yeah. And in the case of mass shootings, it'll be hard to know how many lives it saved. But with respect to suicide, that's already been studied, and we know it helps reduce suicide rates. So I was really pleased that that got through. It is also sitting on the governor's desk. I have every expectation that he's going to sign it. So that's one, to answer your question, one that I'm proud of. There are several others. Something tells me we might talk about before the end of the session, and things having to do with the environment and transportation. But yeah. That was one that I was glad to see finally get through. And it does, I guess I have to say, show how elections matter, because that bill's consistently been defeated very early in the process when the other party was in control, and when we won that election and when Delegate Hope took the chair, we were finally able to get it through. So thank you, Patrick, and I hope and expect this bill is going to have some real positive effects.
I think, oh, sorry, Barbara.
Oh, I just get my little 2 cents in. As you can see, I'm working with stars. Both Patrick and Rip are incredibly effective lawmakers, and they're just both of them are a pleasure to work with. I am most proud of a bill I got through that lawmakers have been trying to pass for 3 or 4 years, and my bill actually stops surprise medical billing, which is a huge deal for Virginians. And it was actually, folks didn't think I would succeed, but I succeeded. The interest groups are very well financed, and they don't like compromising. The interest groups, as you might expect, the Virginia Health and Hospital Association, the Virginia Medical Society, and then a number of other physician groups, and the insurance lobby. But I brought in patient advocates, and I also brought in consumer advocates like the Virginia Poverty Law Center, the Bureau of Insurance, and others. And I just forced a meeting every week. Actually, it was probably twice a week. And then at the end, the last 3 weeks of session, we met every other day. And we came up with a compromise. Now, health policy is my background. As a Fed, I worked in the health policy arena. And I still follow what's going on Capitol Hill. And the Ways and Means Committee had passed a similar bill. I don't think they're going to get theirs out of the House of Representatives, but it was a good bill. And it had to do with an arbitration model. But nonetheless, what happens is if a patient happens to go out of network for emergency care, or even for planned surgery, and one of the providers is not covered, one of their doctors is not in their insurance plan, the only obligation the patient has is to pay their already known deductible or their already known copay, which is part of their current contractual agreement with the insurance plan. They're not responsible for any other amount that the provider may want. The provider and the insurance company would work it out. And I could explain my bill in great detail, but probably I don't want to take that much time. I'm very proud of it. It's a big deal to be able to stop the surprise medical billings in the state.
You know, and Barbara, as you were talking, I was just thinking, like with Patrick's vaccine bill, could anything be more timely?
No,
You know,
apparently not.
I mean,
It came at a great time.
yeah.
I'm really proud we were able to get it out. And healthcare is one of the top concerns of all Virginians. They want improved access. They want affordability. And it's one of those things that keeps us all healthy. When one sector of our society can't access medical care, then all of us are at risk. And I think this COVID ID virus is really showing that to be the case. My disappointment is I had a paid sick leave bill, which I'd worked with the Virginia Interfaith Council on. My colleagues in the House were extraordinarily helpful, and they actually got my bill out of the House, and they got the conference committee report out of the House. It ran into trouble in the Senate. So we'll have to go back and look at that. I think work as we know it is now changing. And I think the value of paid sick days has really come to the forefront. Now, how we provide for that, whether the federal government has a larger role, what kind of requirements the state will place as we move forward, is still yet to be determined. But I'm going to continue to work on a paid sick day bill. And then I have some other bills that we can talk about. Especially in the gun safety area. Patrick, you did a phenomenal job getting
Patrick, you did.
bills out of the committee, and
You really did. I was reflecting this year as I watched the legislative activity, just with pride and awe at how persistent the three of you have been, and really all members of the Arlington delegation, because so much of this legislation that we're talking about, Rip, like your red flag legislation, you've been fighting for years. You know, when you knew it wouldn't win, and you were still getting up at 5 a.m. to drive to Richmond and fight for it. And so, you know, it's such well-deserved victories after all. And it shows that victories don't just happen because, you know, one party takes control. It happens because you've been working on these things and building the coalitions for it out, both the political ones and in business and communities and elsewhere. So I just like to congratulate all of you. And I'd actually like to because there's another series of questions here that we got and you mentioned the paid sick leave, Barbara. How would the three of you characterize overall the session's performance in the area of workers' rights? And we particularly got some questions, and there was some confusion actually in these questions about the collective bargaining bill for public employees like teachers and firefighters. And, you know, how is that going to be implemented given the right to work law that governs Virginia? So what about workers' rights?
I certainly, and my colleagues I think will give you the perspective of the House, but I certainly think the Senate made significant progress on issues that are very important to working families. We made progress on the minimum wage. You know, we didn't go fully to the 15 right away. We go to the 12 by 2023, and we take a break, look at some data that tells us what's going on in the economy, and then we come back and maybe we'll make a determination to move the minimum wage up. We did get collective bargaining through, which the bill that passed actually gives local governments a fair amount of authority. And we're hoping that local governments will use that authority and come up with some really good models that the state can learn from. We got the prevailing wage bill through, which I was the chief co-patron on, and that was important. and I'm trying to think of what other, I mean, we got some wage theft protection bills through. I mean, this was just a landmark year for, you know, worker protection legislation, and for, again, improving the economic security of our working families. So we may not have gotten everything every interest group wanted, but this was more progress than anybody had seen in these areas, at least in a generation.
Yeah, Mark, I do think you need to, you know, you always need to ask the question, you know, compared to what? And, you know, compared to where we could have hoped to have been a year ago. I think in the area of working families, it was a spectacularly successful session. You know, just talk about the session broadly, you know, what I've been saying to people is, depending on who you're talking to, we either had an historically significant transformative session or we destroyed the Commonwealth, depending on who you're talking to. And you know, frankly, that was until Corona hit, and the Commonwealth, of course, is pulling together, regardless of party. The narrative, of course, from the other side was already being teed up to be that the Democratic majority had come into Richmond and destroyed the Commonwealth and unraveled everything that all the great things they had done over the last generation. Of course, that was precisely our intent, to go in and unravel a lot of what they had done over the course of the last 20 years. But I think Barbara is right, and I'm a sort of congenitally glass half full kind of guy. There are certainly things we wish we'd gotten in this space, in the space having to do with working families, and in others. But when you think about where we've come from, and you run down the list of things we were able to accomplish, I'm of the school of thought that we had a spectacularly historic, positive session for workers in Virginia, for the environment in Virginia, for gun safety in Virginia, for all sorts of issues that progressive Democrats hold near and dear. So that's my big picture comment, is that it was generally a incredibly positive session, and I think that counts. That's true in the space having to do with workers' rights as well.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, we took a significant step, and the margins are so thin, especially on the Senate side. You have to take these victories as they come. We didn't get everything we wanted. I know on the minimum wage, we wanted $15 much sooner. We're heading in that direction, but it takes a little bit longer than what we had all hoped. On the collective bargaining, I know the bill that originally passed the House involved state and local, and then it turned out to be just a local option. But I mean, you know, we always know that we are always going to come back next year and build on these things. Mm-hmm. And, you know, you could ask me the same question about the gun violence prevention bills. You know, we could have done more there. We could have done more in a lot of different areas. But we know we're still coming back. We're coming back next year to build on the foundation, to keep building and progressing forward. And that's the thing that people need to realize. We're not going to solve every single problem. I know we didn't make every union or every advocate happy with our workers' rights bills, but we're going to keep coming back, and we're going to keep building and building and getting closer and closer to where we all want to be. And I think that's the message that everyone wants to know. We didn't get everything we wanted, but we got a lot of what we wanted. And it is historic, I think, by any measure. Elections do have consequences. We're making things better for workers here in Virginia, and we're going to keep doing that.
Mark, let me build on Patrick's point about how we're building. We've created a base from which we can build. One of the things that we're now going to be able to do, again, let's just use sort of in the space having to do with workers' rights. The other side frantically worries that, well, apropos of my comment, we're going to destroy the Commonwealth by raising the minimum wage, or we're going to destroy the Commonwealth by allowing public employees to collectively bargain. When it happens, now that those things are going to become law and the sky doesn't fall, right? Yeah. And that we can show that collective bargaining, where in particular localities where it's been used, doesn't bring the locality to its knees, it gives us evidence and arguments to say to the other side, see, we raised the minimum wage to $9.25 and the world didn't end.
Right.
We did these other things and the world didn't end. So it sort of takes arguments away from them. Now, all that's going to get muddled, of course, by what's going on in the rest of the world right now. But I do think we need to take our victories where we can, declare victory and move on and prepare to make the arguments next year that what we're doing as a governing body is working. And I think we're going to be able to show that it is working.
And I think this point that both of you are making about, we need to have perspective here. We need to, as you said at the beginning, Rip, was it a success compared to what? Was it, compared to the grandest dreams and ambitions and hopes we had? Sure, there's some things that, maybe we fell short on. But in terms of where we're coming from and what several generations of leadership by the other party, was quite remarkable. So I think that's important to always keep in mind, and also to remember that, yeah, the Democrats are now in the majority, but the Democratic Party, unlike the Republican Party, is not a cult. It is still a big tent party, and there's a range of views within the Democratic Party, and so sometimes, as I'm sure you know, Barbara, in the Senate especially, where the margins are narrow, you had to win over some Democrats to things. So
yeah, I mean, we had to, and I think my colleagues understand this. We had to compromise to get legislation passed. I mean, that was just the reality of it. In the Senate, there was not an inclination to take drastic steps quickly. Many of the senators, not just one or two, many of the senators felt it was more prudent to, keep our eye on the ball, but to sort of eat the elephant piece by piece rather than trying to take on the whole issue immediately. When you're governing for the whole state, the business community would come to us and say, this is too much change too quickly. We have to readjust. We have to basically change our policies, our look at our bottom line differently. And I mean, these are things they should have been doing earlier. These are things that make good sense. And we believe these are things that are going to strengthen the economy. But it was change. It was significant change for large sectors of the state. And the Senate felt that to ensure things really get implemented, you can write all the laws you want, but at the end of the day, it's going to be the businesses and the groups on the street that are implementing it. We need to bring them along. So I'm very hopeful we get to the goals where we initially started, and then as Rip said, we'll have data, we'll have experience, we'll have maybe some best practices to look at, and if we see growth in certain sectors that have, really moved forward with the policies that we adopted, then we can point to that.
yeah, of course they'll still accuse you of destroying the state, but
Oh yeah.
who was it? Who was the Republican legislator who said Northern Virginia should secede or should be?
Senator Obenshain on the floor of the
Obenshain
Senate thought we perhaps should take the advice of the West Virginia. He sort of was saying it in jest, but not really. He was talking to us about the West Virginia governor in his statements. Yeah.
So are any of you prepared to throw your hat in the ring to be governor of Nova, or do you want to wait on your announcement?
I think the rest of the state would be mightily if we succeeded.
We have other issues to talk about. Maggie, could you remind me how much time we have? Because I want to make sure that we have so many good questions that come in.
Yeah, so it is, we've been going for about an hour. So I'd say probably another 15 minutes to half hour.
Okay. If the three of you are willing. So we got a bunch of questions about the environment. And again, here's an area where the Virginia Clean Economy Act, which is a very complicated piece of legislation, but it did make, it definitely made progress. But but again, here's an area where you had some people who said, oh, the more progressive Virginia Green New Deal, would have been better. That's what we should have been going to. But could you speak a bit about the Clean Economy Act and what it means, especially for the kind of urban setting that we have in Northern Virginia? What is that? Clearly, it's moving in the right direction, but
Rip should address that. He
Yeah.
carried the Clean Economy
Sure.
Act.
Well, I'm happy to at least start. So yes, on my list of things I'm proud of in this last session, the Clean Economy Act is certainly near the top of the list. I carried that bill along with Senator McClellan, who had the Senate version. And we've been using words like historic and transformative to describe the session. I think those are fair words to use, and frankly, others have used them as well to describe the Clean Economy Act. It, in one fell swoop, sort of vaults Virginia from the back of the pack to the front of the pack, or to at least the part of the big states in clean energy policy nationally, absolutely nationally, and certainly the first Southern state to tackle this issue and to set 2045 as a goal for 100% clean energy. I don't think any other Southern state has any such goal. Speaking of working on things for years, Mark, I had since I got to the General Assembly, every year introduced what's called an EERS, an Energy Efficiency Resource Standard, which would have set mandatory goals on our utilities in energy efficiency, which is the quickest, cheapest way to reduce our carbon footprint. And they failed every year in subcommittee. Every year I put in RPS bills, which is a renewable portfolio standard, which would have put mandatory goals in place for our utilities to get us to 100% clean energy. Those failed miserably in the subcommittee. Fast forward, elections matter. This year I got to chair that subcommittee. And an EERS and an RPS are both foundational elements of the Virginia Clean Economy Act, and those are now law in Virginia. As I said, first Southern state, and now among just a handful of states that have both of those in place with clear goals, enforceable goals on our utilities. It also is going to, I think, unlock the solar industry in Virginia. It raises caps, it reduces barriers. Part of the huge coalition that we put together to push this bill was the solar industry, who've been sort of waiting outside of Virginia, waiting for Virginia to open its door to solar, whether we're talking about utility scale solar or rooftop solar. And the VCA does exactly that, and the solar industry is now, I think, poised to sort of pour into Virginia and create jobs. And I think one of the things Arlingtonians are going to see is a lot more rooftop solar coming to Virginia, both on people's homes, and the VCEA and some other bills we've passed are going to unlock community solar in Virginia. The VCEA has aggressive goals on developing storage in Virginia, and of course aggressive goals on developing offshore wind, which is going to be a crucial piece, has to be a crucial piece of getting us to 100% renewable. So I think it's a very exciting piece of legislation. It's been recognized as a sort of groundbreak, certainly for Virginia, it's groundbreaking, and I think for among the 50 states, as I said, it puts us among the leaders. So I think it's one of the great successes of this session.
I think the community solar, especially for a jurisdiction like Arlington, where I know they've been itching for a long time every school in Arlington should have solar panels on the roof. It should be part of the negotiations when developers want to build new buildings, and the ability now to do that, I think, it just opens up a wonderful opportunity.
Yeah, well, it's a new day in Virginia, and as one of my colleagues pointed out, one of the things you learn when you become a new legislator is, even the best of ideas take some time to marinate. This one has taken a bunch of time, and we will be back next year. I don't know. I don't think anyone really knows what the technology is going to look like 5, 6, 10 years from now. And there's nothing in the Virginia Clean Economy Act that says we can't come back in the future and ratchet it up if we've got the technology to do it. So
I just want to add.
What's most important is that it put us on a path, and is now, the policy of the Commonwealth of Virginia that we get to a clean energy economy, and it sets a date and a way to get there. And if we can speed it up, if voters are kind enough to send me back, I'll be there, eager to speed it up.
This is Barbara. I just wanted to mention, I do think it was incredible landmark legislation, Rip. So thank you. And I was a chief co-patron on Senator McClellan's bill. But more importantly, I put in a separate bill that will direct the governor every 4 years to come up with a plan going forward, a 10-year plan going forward, that will identify new ways of reaching these very ambitious goals, which is, I believe, and I don't want to misspeak, but in my bill, and I think this corresponded with the Clean Economy Act, that we come to zero carbon emissions across all sectors by 2045, and then zero carbon within the electric utility sector by 2040. So it's a nice backdrop. So I sort of have the broader goal, and this is what you need to do, Governor, with less sort of how you get there. And Rip's bill really says you need to do it, and these are the steps you need to take, and there may be more steps you need to take, but you have to do these minimum steps. So I think together it's quite it's a great backdrop and a great policy statement.
And I think, like the gun issue and other issues, as we've been talking about, you have to take those first steps. And we're moving in the right direction. And the Green New Deal package can be kind of the aspirational,
Right.
goal setting package, but you have to do what you can do. Let's talk about transportation, because that's always a big issue for people in Northern Virginia. Not so much while we're all in isolation. I saw a picture the other day. I don't know if you know LA well, but the 405 in LA was a picture of the 405 at rush hour, and traffic was just flowing, like, that's the LA freeway, and it's like
so many people were home. You mean
everybody's home, nobody has anywhere to go, and you see it on roads around here too. But this will pass, this will end, and we'll be right back to gridlock and everywhere we were before, unless, as we were talking about earlier before we were on live, there's some fundamental changes that this brings about in the way people work. But without getting into that, how was this session? What are you proud about? What are you happy about? I know the gasoline tax was one thing that will help a lot, but in the area of transportation, what will you say with the main victories?
Well, we passed that major transportation bill. I sit on the Senate Transportation Committee. And I think it decentralizes a lot of the funding sources. So there's more revenue available at the regional level. As you know, there's a 10-cent increase in the gasoline tax over 2 years across the state. And then areas that did not apply an increased regional sales tax. This bill says 7 cents. Nova, Hampton Roads, and the I-81 corridor are exempt from that additional regional sales tax because we applied ours 2 years ago. So other parts of the state will apply a sales tax, and they'll be able to keep those dollars for regional projects, just like we're keeping our dollars up here for regional projects. So at the end of the day, I mean, the new funding streams actually gave us truly dedicated sources of revenue for Metro, so we don't have to divert dollars from our roads and other projects to fund our compact obligation for the Metro. We will have more dollars to roll into mass transit and other things, which are important up here. And we'll still have dollars for roads and appropriate connectors. And you know, the railway, the separate railway track from Richmond to the district, the CRX line, will be funded. So I think overall it was a very good package. I like the fact that there was more local control as part of the entire framework.
Mark, I'm really glad you asked about this bill, because I actually think this bill is one of the sort of under the radar, sleeper, most important bills we passed this session. You know, for the following reason, Barbara's described it right in terms of revenue sources and such. But what it is it's incredibly forward-looking. Apropos of what we were just talking about with the Clean Economy Act. Last year was the first year in Virginia where miles traveled went up, but gas tax revenues went down. And what states are facing all across the country, this is obviously not unique to Virginia, as we've been successful in getting people off the making cars more fuel efficient. What's happening is people are driving on the roads but buying less gas. Our system is built on financing our road system and other parts of our system with a gas tax that as we electrify transportation and move towards electric vehicles, or certainly more hybrids, is a revenue source that we know is going to go way down, if not disappear, within the next decade. And so what this bill does is put us on a track to bridging that 10 years, which is the target, to getting us to a place where we will be shifting more to a user fee type of arrangement than just simply gas tax. And that, of course, captures everyone who use our roads, including folks who come in from out of state and use our roads. If you're an all electric car using Virginia's roads, you are still, right. You know, you're still driving a car that's requiring, that's degrading our roads, and we need to maintain them. And so we need to look forward to a future where we can't do that with gas taxes anymore. And what this bill does is put us on that course to be able to get there.
Thank you. That's good to know. And I actually hadn't realized how important that was. But you're absolutely right. That and even just, you know, as cars have become more energy efficient, you're buying less gas. I mean, there's so many things that work against that as being your primary source of revenue. You know, there was one question that I meant to ask when we were talking about the virus, and I forgot to. But that is there any movement within the Democratic caucus that you're hearing about possibly implementing a vote by mail in November? I mean, I think that would offer huge challenges, and the you know, to have to implement it on a very short notice just opens up such a great possibility for fraud and shenanigans. But on the other hand, we don't know where we're going to be in November with this. Is that something that there should be a study group? The state should have somebody looking into this and how we'd implement it? Or?
I'll defer to my House of Delegate colleagues. We haven't had a conversation like that in the Senate, but I have an opinion.
Great article in the Post. I can't remember whether it was today or yesterday, on this issue, Mark. The answer is yes, although not with respect to this November. There have been conversations about moving Virginia towards a mail-in before Corona ever hit, and there might even have been a bill put in this year. I can't recall. But there are states that do their elections now by mail. I think Oregon is one, Washington is another.
Right.
So it can be done, but it is not something you can just snap your fingers and do. One of the things we did pass this year is no excuse early voting. And that will have the effect of flattening, pardon the use of that word, flattening,
curve.
Literally the election. It turns it into an election month rather than an election day, right?
Right.
And not everyone will have to go vote on election day, which, by the way, makes these elections also more secure. And we've always had the ability to vote by mail in terms of absentee ballots. So, I mean, I can't tell you that I know of any organized effort yet to think about doing Virginia's elections by mail, but there have been conversations even before Corona about moving in that direction.
Yeah, I think we're just going to have to see what we think November is going to look like, because this
Right.
is the largest turnout of the 4-year cycle. And so there's
Yeah.
no way, even if you have absentee voting, there's no way to practice social distancing on a big turnout election like this. So as we get closer, I do think it would require a law. I'm not sure that the governor has the authority just to send out a directive that we're going to do this. I do believe it requires a law, and that would require a special session.
Yeah.
But I think as we try to get our handle on this pandemic and this crisis we're in, is it going to last long enough? But I do think it's going to make us look at a whole host of things differently, working from home, but also whether you can vote mail-in type things, or how we deal with FOIA and different government activities. It's going to make us think a lot differently about these things in the future.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, there's federal legislation. I think Senator Klobuchar has put in a federal bill to either require or encourage states to do this. That is all mail-in voting, and providing funds for everything from postage, prepaid postage envelopes to more funds to pay, to help local electoral boards, deal with the costs associated with it. So even this is another thing where we'll have to see sort of the interaction between federal legislation and what we might be able to do on the state level.
This is Barbara. Just for the viewers who might be involved in our elections, and many of them are, I'm sure many of our viewers volunteer election day and are maybe poll watchers or poll workers. It would be helpful if our local Board of Elections started thinking about the issues that would need to be addressed. And we need to have conversations with our state Board of Elections. I know I would like to encourage probably the chairs of our Privilege and Elections Committee. In the Senate, it's Senator Deeds and I don't know who's
Joe Lindsay.
I think it would be great if the two of them sent a letter to the State Board of Elections, asking the State Board of Elections to think about this issue and outline some of the, challenges that would have to be addressed if we were to move forward with it, because I'm unaware of any study that's out there, at least at the state level, that would really guide us. And I know, voter fraud will be a big issue. At least Republicans continually bring that up. They blow it out of proportion, but they use it as, a barrier to access many times. And we just need to be prepared to counter those arguments, because I think it may very well be the wave of the future, and we need to be able to address it. So
I agree with you that the Republicans use voter fraud as their excuse to suppress votes. But, with a mail-in system, unless it's very well thought out, the possibility for voter fraud is huge.
Right. So and they'll be ready to put those arguments to us.
Yeah. But I was thinking one possible response, if this crisis continues, would be, so Virginia now has the no excuse early voting. Maybe some funding or resources to jurisdictions so that the number of venues could be expanded, so that you're avoiding crowds. So say in Arlington, instead of just being able to vote early at the courthouse, you have 4 other locations around the county. And then that way,
making it easier for people to actually that early in-person voting.
And so you're not in a mob, because if it's only one location, then you're very likely social distancing is going to become hard. But if you do it in, say, 4 community centers plus the courthouse, and that's something that
I think that's
really a
great
resource question.
Yeah,
that's a local thing, though, I think.
Yeah, but maybe the state could provide some funding to jurisdictions that want to do it. I don't know. And it's a local thing and probably more of the densely populated jurisdictions.
Well,
Another thing.
actually, Mark, in some ways it works the opposite way. When we've talked about this in Richmond before, remember there are parts of Virginia that are less densely populated, and if you have only one satellite center, it can be an hour drive to go vote early at that.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah.
And so when I've met with registrars around the state to talk about things like early voting, that's exactly the problem some of the rural registrars talk about is needing money or other places to have satellite locations, because if you do it just in one place, you are in some ways disenfranchising people who might live literally an hour away. Some of these localities are they're pretty big.
Yeah.
From a land mass perspective.
No, right. But it's certainly something we need to look at, and I think we need to get the experts coming up with a playbook for us.
Mm-hmm.
And I liked your suggestion about maybe if in these urban areas having more sites.
Just making it easier and less concentrated.
Yeah.
We have obviously we have a challenge in November. There's somebody in the White House we'd like to see pack his bags. And then, as we were so lucky in Virginia that we have elections every year, we always get to do this. And then the year after that, we need to make sure that none of that blue paint has faded and that we keep Virginia blue. So, but I want to ask immediately about November. Because you're speaking here to a group of activists, volunteers, precinct leaders, and all. What is the most important thing people can do, their time and their resources between now and November, to make sure that we have to make sure that we wake up on Wednesday morning after Election Day, and even if we're still in isolation, you can always drink champagne in isolation. You can have a quarantini or something. What can we do? And especially now that some of the conventional things like canvassing, are probably going to be inadvisable.
Well, I could just start. I mean, we're very good at this type of activity outside of canvassing. I mean, Arlington Blue Families, for example, has sent out tens of thousands of postcards, which I think are very effective. I think the phone calls are. But this is unlike the election that we had last year, where all the Arlington delegates and senators were in safe elections and you were busing people to other parts of the state to help them with turnout. But turnout's going to matter, and Arlington have high turnout. And so we do need to focus on Arlington, but also all points. And of course, we've got to help Delegate Wexton, I still call her Senator, Congresswoman Wexton and Spangelberger and Aloria, to make sure that keep their seats in a high turnout election. So we need to focus locally, but also we need to push our activities elsewhere. And, whether it's writing checks or making phone calls or postcards, which I think are very effective. We can have social distancing postcard writing parties, very effective. Yeah. And I think all those things, everything above, all the above should be incorporated in our strategy.
This is Barbara.
Those are good suggestions. Josh Kaplowitz has done a remarkable job with Blue Families. He really has.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think these Zoom gatherings are great, and we need to. And I applaud ACDC and Maggie and you, Mark, and certainly Mary Detweiler, who's such a good organizer. Perhaps this is a model that we take to precinct by precinct, but we take it statewide. I frankly am concerned about states that are going to be toss-up states, because at the end of the day, it's going to be our Michigan, our Wisconsin, our Pennsylvania, Florida, and Ohio. And I think we have the best shot of making sure Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania turn blue. And that if we do that, we will win the White House, expecting to hold all other states that have traditionally voted blue in the presidential election. So that's a big expectation. I'm prepared, and because we can do Zoom and other things, I mean, I really want to help these states that may be, you know, teetering. My brother's in Pennsylvania, blue collar Democrat. In his view, this whole thing is about the economy. And, you know, if a safety net is rolled out to help, you know, him and his friends in similar situations, I think he would be more apt to vote Democratic. But it's going to be a challenge. I mean, who really expected Trump to win?
Trump didn't.
No, he didn't himself.
No, Trump didn't.
So, I guess that was obvious, right? Yeah. So it is going to be a challenge.
You raise a good point, Barbara. I've often told friends from overseas who are trying to understand the American political system, the first thing I've said is don't try to understand it. But the second is that we don't really have a nationwide presidential election. We have a presidential election in about 8 states.
Right.
That's where the presidential, because of our electoral college system. And Virginia used to be one of those, and hopefully we've kind of graduated out and are no longer one of those 8 states.
Right.
But maybe somebody else like Georgia is working its way into that category. But it seems like every election, the big landslides, the Nixon, McGovern, you know, Reagan, Duke, I mean, those LBJ over Goldwater, that I just don't see that happening again. Our country's too divided.
Yeah.
So it's always going to come down to the de facto election is going to be held in about 6 to 8 states.
Yeah. Yeah.
So-
No,
I think you're right. I think you're right, Mark. My Virginia's a blue state. None of this purple stuff anymore. We are a blue state, although we cannot take that for granted.
Exactly.
And so we have to work. And as Patrick pointed out, there are down ballot races that we've got to be really concerned about, because, you know, we want President Biden to have a Democratic House of Representatives and a Democratic Senate.
Well, don't forget Senator Warner.
And Senator Warner, thank you.
Yeah.
Which I believe is, I think a Democratic Senate is actually possible. So, and there just is not a place in the Commonwealth, and I dare say in the country, with a better organized group of Democrats than Arlington. I mean, we know how this works. We know what works. We're going to have to improvise a little bit depending on where we are with social distancing at the time. But Patrick's exactly right, and Patrick, you ought to be campaign chair this year. You know, it's all the blocking and tackling that we all know about, right? It's the postcards, it's the calls, it's the talk to your friends. If we can knock on doors, it's the knocking on doors. And then, you know, Arlington exports itself so well. Steve Baker's operation just has done amazing things around the state. We will more than punch above our weight in terms of helping this fall. But Patrick's exactly right, by the way. We need to roll it up in Arlington.
Exactly.
You know, I dare say, I'm not going to, as I said, Don's going to be fine. But you know, we can deliver Virginia to Biden between, you know, frankly, between Fairfax and Arlington and Alexandria. We can create an insurmountable lead for Biden. So.
Yeah, that's a really important point that, and Patrick, that you made too, that, you know, we need 80% turnout and 80% Biden. I mean, we need, because that's the engine for keeping Virginia blue. That's where it's going to happen.
Right.
You know, interestingly enough,
which is precisely why Jerry Falwell wants to get rid of us, of course. So.
Yeah.
And Mark Overton.
I was just going to say, I'm going to say when we have President Biden in the White House, I think that poses another set of challenges for us in 2021. So, you know, because historically, when we've had a Democratic president, we have not made gains in the General Assembly. In fact, we've had some reversals historically, like when Obama was president in 2011, he was still president in 2011, but they had the elections in the Senate, and the Senate had started off with a Democratic majority Senate and ended up in the minority. So they lost 2 seats. So, so there's this dynamic which hasn't really been tested yet, because we haven't had a Democrat in the White House. And, you know, a democratically controlled General Assembly. So I think there's going to be a slightly different playbook that we'll have to adjust to in 2021.
Barbara, that's
we're busy rewriting history in Virginia now, so we can't get hung up on that. And McAuliffe, by the way, flipped that dynamic. He was the first Democrat to win after a Democratic presidential, I think either ever or in a long time.
You're right.
So it can be done.
Right.
Oh yeah, no, it can be done. And I think statewide it could be done. I'm worried about our, you know, some of our purple districts when you're looking at the General Assembly seats and the Senate seats.
Especially the Senate.
They're more at risk when we have a Democratic president.
That's the big unknown, because we don't know what the districts are even going to look like.
And that's the other piece too, which is another.
Do you any of you want to comment on that specific issue? Because we did get a couple of questions about redistricting and whether it's the right decision was made in terms of going with a kind of bipartisan neutral panel.
I mean, I can start if you'd like. I think this is where we might have some differences. I was planning to, and I voted for the amendment the first time it came around, and I ended up voting against it the second time. And I was a yes on the amendment until about 24 hours before the vote. And give credit to our caucus leadership led by Delegate Sullivan, Chairman Sullivan. We probably spent a good 10 or 12 solid hours, maybe more, but 10 or 12 solid as a caucus talking about the ins and outs. And people got a chance to say what was on their hearts and minds. And I listened. I didn't say a word about this until about 24 hours before the vote. And I have never been moved so much by a lot of the arguments. And it got me to think because I was internalizing this with everything else going on. When I first ran for office in 2009, I campaigned on independent and nonpartisan redistricting. I remember distinctly in my general election, I slipped up and I said bipartisan. And I remember Josh Rubner, who was running as a third party candidate, corrected me and said, no, I support nonpartisan, not bipartisan. And ever since then, you know, that distinction is very important. And at some point, and I had always been promoting One Virginia 2021, I know as others have, for years, because they were an independent organization that was trying to promote nonpartisan independent redistricting. And at some point, we compromised on those values. And when the Democrats, we put in a bill when we were debating this bill towards the end of the session, we put up a substitute that was true nonpartisan independent districting. And that's what I wanted to vote for. I was convinced by my colleagues and just listening to them that this was more likely to result in a going to the Virginia Supreme Court. And this was not nonpartisan and it wasn't independent. And if we're going to amend the Constitution, we should get as close to it being right as possible. We had the opportunity to do that with the substitute that put up. I was pleased to, with Delegate Sullivan and many other Democrats vote for that. That is the true form of what I've campaigned on since 2009. I didn't want to compromise my values in making sure that we had nonpartisan independent districting. I do respect and love and admire people that can look at the same set of facts and come up with a different conclusion, but that's where I landed on it. And it really wasn't until the very end did I change my vote. And I felt like I was in a place for the past year trying to defend a vote that was really hard for me to grapple with. And I feel much better about my vote now than I had before. And I think for me, it was the right decision.
Mark, let me just follow up on Patrick's point. I would have to say this may have been the hardest vote I've cast since I've been in the General Assembly. And I'll put my nonpartisan redistricting cred up against anybody's. I've been talking about this like Patrick, for years and years, and it's really important to me. But let me just do this from the chair of the caucus's perspective. Patrick's right. We spent hours and hours and hours talking about this. And I do think what people need to realize, if you go and you look at the votes, all 55 Democrats in the House and all 21 Democrats in the Senate voted for redistricting reform. There is no dispute within either caucus that we need to redistrict in 2021 differently than we ever have before. And that Democrats, despite our majority and therefore the ability to draw the lines any way we want, need to cede that power and find some other way to draw the lines that is nonpartisan and much more fair. Every member of both caucuses voted for a bill that would do exactly that, including Patrick and I. I ended up voting against the amendment as well. The math's pretty easy to figure out. There were 46 members of the Democratic caucus in the House that voted against the constitutional amendment and 9 that voted for it. Like Patrick, I've been a proponent of this for a long time and working with One Virginia 2021. It was a very difficult vote, but I do think people need to realize, because there's been some discussion about split within the caucus, and obviously there was people voted different ways, but there is no split within the caucus, as far as I'm concerned, as the chairman of the caucus, on the basic question of should we redistrict in 2021 in a nonpartisan way. The answer to that is yes, from every Democrat in the General Assembly. The difference of opinion is how do we go about doing that? And to my way of thinking, there was always sort of a plan A and a plan B. Plan A, amend the Constitution. Plan B being to do it with legislation, because people need to realize, we will be in a position, whether the constitutional amendment passes or not, we're going to be in a position in 2021 to be controlling how it is done. And the bill, the substitute that Patrick referenced, presented a much more detailed and a much more, in my view, nonpartisan way of doing it. And so the way I was thinking this through is, we've all talked the talk, it's time to walk the walk. I anticipate, and frankly, I know all 55 of my colleagues, at least in the House side, and I'm sure Barbara's caucus is the same, we're prepared to walk the walk, whether it's through the constitutional amendment or whether it's through passing legislation, to do what no other controlling majority caucus in Virginia has ever done, which is to draw lines in a fair, nonpartisan way. And whether we do that because a constitutional amendment passes this fall, or whether we do it through legislation that we are committed to passing, if the constitutional amendment doesn't pass, it's going to be, if I have anything to say about it, and I think I will, and Patrick will have something to say about it, we're going to draw the lines differently than we've ever done it before. We're going to do it in a fair, nonpartisan way. The question is how.
Well, you're going to vote for up or down whatever the independent redistricting commission presents to us, is really where we're ending up. I voted for the constitutional amendment, and I also voted for enabling legislation which lays out very detailed guidance on ensuring minority representation and ensuring that the districts are physically contiguous, they meet all the DOJ criteria, and more importantly, bring in the culture, attitudes, and perspectives of the districts as they're drawn. So the Senate seemed to lean more heavily towards the constitutional amendment, and I voted for that because I really believed that I wanted something secure in our Constitution. And as you know, the amendment does establish a commission of 16 individuals. 8 would be appointed, evenly divided between the Speaker and the, President of the Senate would be appointing 4 and 4, and then evenly divided within that division proportionally among the 2 major parties. And then 8 retired circuit court judges would appoint 8 experts to the commission. So that's the body that is going to move forward. We expect that this referendum will be before the voters 2020 and on the November 2020 ballot, and that in fact, it'll be approved. So I'm explaining the mechanics of it. But at the bottom line is whatever this commission comes up with, they will present it to the General Assembly, and it will be an up or down vote. So lawmakers have removed themselves as best we could from tinkering with an objective draw, if you will, of these different lines. Now, by the Constitution, we can't remove ourselves from making the decision. That clearly rests with the legislative body. But as Rip said, we have removed ourselves from actually, drawing those district lines, which I think is a real transformational kind of thing. I mean, if in fact we had, I believe, if we had districts that were less tilted towards the, in this case, it was sort of the Republican draw. When we had the Medicaid expansion debate, I think we would have been able to pass Medicaid expansion sooner if members were not so concerned about having a primary to their far right because their districts were so, lopsided, were drawn in such a lopsided way. So absolutely, I think this nonpartisan redistricting is a very, very, very transformational thing for Virginia. And I'm really proud that, here the Democrats control the House and the Senate. And we could have done what many other politicians have done generations before us and said, we're in power, we're going to make use of that power, and we're going to, come up with the maps. And we didn't do that. So I was pleased that we honored the values of, accountability and transparency and good government.
Here, I just want to add one thing. I mean, this will be interesting to see how this turns out, because to Senator Favola's point, I mean, this still has to be cleared by the voters in November. And I know that the Arlington Democratic Committee has passed a resolution opposing the amendment. So has Fairfax. And I would anticipate that would translate into a sample ballot. I don't know, but I presume that when Democrats hand out a sample ballot, they will have no scratched in on that question. And with the high turnout that we're going to have, I think there is with that some question of whether or not that this will certainly pass Arlington. My colleagues that opposed it significantly in Norfolk and Hampton Roads, they have assured me that that's going to be what's being handed out in those elections. So I do think it's a question of whether or not I think there's still a question of whether or not it would pass. I don't know.
Hey, Mark, let me take one partisan shot as Maggie's has appeared, and I think our time is about up. But I got to tell you, the irony that filled the chamber, and some might even use the word hypocrisy, as Mark Cole, who'd been chairman of the Privileges and Elections Committee for years, got up to lecture the Democrats about the importance of nonpartisan redistricting. And then to hear Jay Leftwich and Jason Miyares, two Republican members, get up and talk about how excited they were to finally be able to vote for nonpartisan redistricting reform. It was all I could do to keep my stomach.
Wow.
I mean, it was.
Wow, I'm sorry I missed that.
It's just remarkable that the Republicans had the gall, frankly, to get up and lecture us about the importance of nonpartisan redistricting, because they've been standing in the way of this forever.
Yeah.
They were talking to the 55 of us who, as I said, are united, despite the differences about how to get there, are united on the importance of this issue. This is a Democratic issue, not a Republican issue. And it was. I see Patrick nodding his head. When they got up to give these speeches, the room just filled up with irony and hypocrisy. But what an interesting fall election it's going to be, because every Republican voter out there is going to vote for this amendment. They will. This is now Republican orthodoxy.
Well, and
to be in favor of this amendment.
And I frankly think a fair number of Democrats are going to vote for it too.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Whether it's on the ballot, whether it's on the sample ballot or not. I mean,
to Patrick's point, exactly right.
Democrats-
So there's going to be the Republicans are all going to vote for it, and then there's going to be this. Again, I don't like to use words like split, but disagreement. Some Democrats will vote for it, and some won't. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens in November.
And I think the ones that, well, it'll be very interesting.
But again, I think that the comforting point in this is that it's Democrats who brought this up. It's Democrats who are talking about this and who are willing to have an internal fight over it, because we're as I said earlier, we're not a cult, we're a political party with a big tent political party. And frankly, this is, I mean, just speaking as a political scientist, there is probably any government where policymakers, legislators are elected by geographic districts.
Mm-hmm.
This is a huge issue. This is it's a critical issue in Virginia and other states, because what you have is this tension between ethics and fairness and political competition. And political competition is good. We want to win. We want our agenda there, but you also want to be fair and ethical. And this, in any democracy that's governed the way ours is on geographic districts, this is where that clash really comes to a head. So it's not surprising there are different perspectives on it. And it's not surprising that there aren't different perspectives in the Republican Party. But but however it works out, as all three of you have said, there will be change.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
I did want to chime in about the sample ballot. The party has not actually taken a position on the proposed amendment this session. The party has supported independent redistricting reform, but there has not been a decision whether or not to have instructions on the Democratic sample ballot in the fall on the issue. That's going to be something before the steering committee and before the general body closer to the fall in the election.
Right.
So I just wanted to let people know that it's definitely being talked about, and there is, as you all have said, a wide variety of opinions within the party. So I think we're still figuring out from Arlington's perspective what instructions, if any, the party's going to give on that particular issue.
Thanks for the clarity.
Thank you.
Maggie, I think we've probably occupied enough of our representatives' time. It's not that we have anywhere to go or anything to do. But
I've been going through my bookshelves. I've been doing,
yeah,
the honey-do list has been growing.
But all I can say after this is Zoom rocks, and so do the three of you. So we're personally, I feel just so fortunate that we have you in Richmond representing us, and that now you can actually get done things that you want to get done.
You and the whole Democratic establishment has been the change that we've wanted. I mean, you really have been the change. We couldn't be here if we hadn't flipped seats, if we hadn't captured the majority. So this is as much your win and your agenda as it is ours. We were tools to articulate the views and to get bills passed, but we very much were responding to a wonderful political environment that you really created for us. So that's been great. It's great to take Arlington values statewide, and I think we were all very proud of this General Assembly session. And I just want to say that it is a true pleasure working with the Arlington delegation. And I do want to give a shout out to Delegate Hope and to Delegate Sullivan in particular. They're just really incredibly dedicated and smart, effective lawmakers.
Thank you. And thank you to,
Thanks, Barb.
I agree everything that Senator Favola said. And thank you to ACDC for making this possible under the circumstances. We really are grateful to get our message out and talk to the voters. It's frustrating sitting here and not being able to have these types of town halls and forums like we're all accustomed to.
Yeah.
Really appreciate you giving us this opportunity, Mark and Maggie, and to Jill and others. Thank you very much.
And Mary.
Yeah, I'll just add.
Mary, you're amazing, Mary.
Mary, It is for all Mark and Maggie and Mary and everyone who eventually will watch this. It's nice to be with you being now a newly defined term. This is how we're going to be with one another.
Yeah.
And nice to have been with you all.
And that brings up a good point. So the party is going to start facilitating kind of Zoom happy hours and coffee hours starting this week. So we're really trying to use the technology as we can to connect people during this social distancing time. And we'd be more than happy to have members of our delegation join us for these social hours via Zoom. The other thing I want to mention, at the beginning, I misspoke. It is both a West area and River area
And
session.
Right, great. Great. I
So
have a lot of the river area.
yes. So I really want to thank both the West and River area leaders, particularly Mary Detweiler, Chris DeRosa, and John Seymour. They've done a lot of great work to put this together and really adapted well with the extraordinary circumstances we're all living in.
And in terms of these happy hours, I know Maggie is working hard to see how to get Zoom to serve drinks.
Yes.
But we're working on it.
Wow, that's amazing.
We'll pass a law.
Yeah.
Change the
Pass
ABC
a
laws.
law.
Pass
That's
a
right.
law.
We're in
Pass a
charge
law.
now.
Wait, did I tell you I chair the ABC committee, the Rehab and Social Services Committee? I have oversight over ABC. Let's
There
do
you
it.
go. Let's work on it. Thanks,
work on it.
everyone. Thanks so
Thank you.
much.
Thank
Y'all
you.
have a great day.
Have a great day.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.
Bye.
Bye-bye.